Hello universe, Josh here. This video I want to talk about spirit and what is spirit, what is spirituality. Most people think of spirit as being something that exists as an accessory to nature. You have a spirit or a soul which is separate from your body and which might live on to go to heaven or hell or whatever. Thus, skeptics and atheists, materialists if you will, can say, well, since we can't perceive it, it doesn't exist. Since we can't measure it, it doesn't exist. They say there's only your body made of cells. There's no soul. Your cells are made of molecules, atoms, maybe some heat energy and chemical energy, which is merely an expression of matter's relationship to other matter, or as we've learned to call it in grade school, potential energy. Is there such a thing as spirit, soul, etc.? Well, no, because there's no such thing of it as that, because it's not a thing. There's no such thing being an object that exists in reality. It's an abstract concept, which by definition does not exist in the material world. The abstract is non-existent. It doesn't exist. Nothing abstract really exists. Nothing is abstract is really there. Only concrete things exist. Let me take a moment though to get you to question, maybe, follow along with me if you like, how much concrete things really do exist. Now let's start with my hand, for example. You'd say my hand exists, right? It's a concrete thing. It's one of the most common things in our lives. We use it for almost every task. It's material, measurable, visible, and you could, given the right equipment, take very precise measurements of my hand. I don't know why you would want to, but you could develop tools using science that exists currently in order to measure how many cells are in it, or count how many tiny little hairs there are on my hand. But wait, you already see maybe some problems developing. First of all, if we're going to measure my hand, let's ask the question, where does it begin? Right about there, I guess, on the wrist. I don't know. I guess it's kind of arbitrary where you decide how you're gonna measure the hand. Like, say you pick, you say, okay, after this bone, that's my hand, and that's some other part of me, my wrist or my forearm. But then get down to the molecular level or the cellular level, we'll say, and where does, because this connects. This is all part of me. So some of this is connected to the hand. There's tendons in here that connect my hand to my arm, and the tendons, they appear to be continuous, and there's also blood vessels and other things that don't seem to end right here between my hand and my arm. And then so there's no definite obvious cutoff point where this is my hand and this is my arm. So you can see that the hand is, maybe it appeared to be a concrete thing at first, but you think about it for a little while, and you realize that the hand is actually an abstract concept that we have kind of created, and it's useful, it's obvious, but we've created it to describe an object that is an aggregate of many other things that operates in the real world. Oh, and what about the blood in my hand? Like, does the blood count as part of my hand? If we're going to weigh it, how do we decide? Do we include the blood, or do we subtract that from the overall weight? I guess it depends on your purpose, but I'll get into purposes later on. If we wanted to measure how much exactly my hand weighs, or whatever, for whatever reason, maybe we're manufacturing gloves for the space program or something, and we need to be very precise, or maybe for some kind of hazardous materials handling, where having a very slight imperfection would cause perhaps electrical irregularities or magnetic irregularities, which we couldn't have in materials handling. I don't know, whatever reason. Maybe it's not a hand, maybe it's a robotic hand. Whatever. The question I'm asking is, if we were to weigh it, or if we were to measure it, how much it weighs, what would we include? Now, If you say you cut off a finger or two or three, is that still a hand? No fingers at all. Is that still a hand? I mean, it's got the vestiges of a hand. And I also wanted to talk about time. My hand is obviously going to change over time. There's constantly cells dividing. There's ATP, I guess. I don't know how all that works, but there's energy being used up, expended in moving my hand, making it do different things. Your fingernails, cells are dying, falling off. There's dirt. There's bacteria on my hand. Does that count as part of my hand? I don't think so, but there's oil and water. Does that count? So which hand is real? The one in the present, or the one in the past, or the one in the future? Now, the only one we can possibly have observations of is the hand in the past. The hand in the present, even if we take observations, it will always take time for those to reach our brains or our eyes or the graph that we're recording these on. So all observations are going to be of the hand in the past. Now, is that really my hand? Well, it's going to be different ever so slightly from second to second. So what I'm getting at is that you can never have a precisely accurate measurement, or I guess you could say model, of a human hand. You can make arbitrary decisions and get something that you want out of it, but there's no way to get an absolute this is a hand without being arbitrary, without making arbitrary decisions. What we do, the reason that our brains are able to form the concept of a hand, is we make aggregates of all of the hands that we've ever seen and experienced, and there's a little bit of wiggle room, there's some fuzzy logic there, and we kind of have this idea. It's an abstract concept, but it's created from past observations and kind of an accumulated experience. And this is how we form our ideas of every kind of object that exists and that we can understand in the universe. And in science, this process has become very formalized as observations, and there are things in the universe which we cannot otherwise see, which we have been able to form concepts of thanks to science. The atom is one example. Distant stars and galaxies is another example. These are things that we can't otherwise observe, but we've been able to conceptualize thanks to science. Thanks to technology, really. So, in concrete reality, there is no such thing as a hand. It's just tendons, blood vessels, muscles, skin, etc. All these different organs working together, and we call them, combined, we call them a hand. It's useful to us to do so, but the fact is it doesn't exist as such. It doesn't exist as a hand. It exists as a collection of atoms and molecules, basically. So a supposedly concrete thing is actually a collection of many smaller concrete things, so it's not actually a concrete thing at all. And let's zoom in to the atoms themselves, and are they concrete things? Well, what's an atom? An atom also has components, so an atom as such doesn't necessarily exist because it's made of other things. It's not an atom, it's a collection of subatomic particles. So we can construct a concrete hand out of ideas of what a hand should be. We allowed for variations in size, color, hairiness, possibly even numbers of fingers, to the point where we can recognize a hand in a painting or a hand in a cartoon as a hand. Even a stick figure diagram stands a high chance of being recognized and identified as a hand. How do we identify a hand? Well, we gather information about it and we create an aggregate picture, and a hand is the sum of its parts. As far as our brain is concerned, these are just things like shape and color. We don't necessarily measure how many cells are in it, or what it's made of, if there's actually bone in there, or if maybe somebody has artificial titanium bones in their hand, or pins or whatever. We don't look at that. It's the sum of its attributes. And then we give it some wiggle room, and we're able to make judgments that, that's a hand. Okay, now I'll leave that topic alone for a little while and turn to something a little slightly less concrete. That's diseases. We all know that diseases exist as we define them. They're concrete things, we think.